will speak with a very strong...
Time now for my political panel, Liberal MP Katie Allen and the Shadow Assistant Minister for Financial Services and Superannuation, Matt Thistlethwaite. Both join me. Welcome to both of you. Katie, beginning with you, 4 cases now in Melbourne, no new restrictions announced. You are an epidemiologist and you have, of course, lived through both lockdowns. Is this the right approach? It's a very different approach to the one we've seen in other states and territories.
Look, I have to say I am pretty comfortable that the Victorian State Government is obviously looking at all of the information at this point in time. And what I really like to hear is that we are being told what the sites are that these people who have COVID have been in contact with. So that's all being made very public. 2 of those cases are from the one family, but we are really on a bit of a precipice. I mean, I think the most important thing is the contact tracing happening at the speed that it needs to happen? And are people making sure that they're being very careful in those hotspot areas where these cases are arising in the north of Melbourne? And then lastly, this is an opportunity. Please, Melburnians, get out and get vaccinated. We're going into winter. We're going to continue to have small outbreaks. We know that. We know quarantine can't be perfect because 1 in 100 cases become positive after the 14 days, and there is human error and we have more infectious variants. So now is the time to put your shoulder forward and get vaccinated.
Matt, the CMO, Professor Paul Kelly, today spoke of the need for COVID vaccine incentives. What should it look like?
Well, firstly, Patricia, I think we need a public awareness campaign. We need an education campaign that highlights that these vaccines are safe and that people should be getting the vaccination as quickly as possible and when their turn comes up, so that we can open up the economy as quickly as possible. And I think that's the one area where the Commonwealth Government isn't doing enough. Some sort of public awareness campaign that provides that information, that uses popular and high-profile Australians to encourage others to get the vaccine as quickly as possible. You know, a shot of the Prime Minister on the front page of the papers getting the vaccination with an Australia mask on doesn't cut it for a public awareness campaign.
Yeah, Katie Allen, are you concerned about that too? Do you think we need new strategies to get people out to do this?
Yes, I do actually. I think the issue is that we have had issues with supply, really through no fault of our own. There have been issues where Europe's needed it more than us, and we've had supply issues that have now been resolved with regards to production of AstraZeneca in large amounts here in Australia, which is a great thing for our sovereign capability. We know that we've had the ability to roll this out, but supply hasn't really been ready to match demand. Now that supply is coming online and we're getting new numbers of people who are now eligible for vaccines, then it's time to start ramping it up. But we don't want to overdo it, because I have to say, when we were first talking about the vaccine rollout, if we get too enthusiastic, then we have people then being disappointed if there's not enough supply. So we need to make sure supply matches demand, and it's really good that supply is now coming through the system. We're ready to open up to new groups, and that is happening with now over 50s being eligible for the vaccine, and it's good to hear that people are getting out there and getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. But at this point in time, I think we're sort of in balance with supply and demand, so I don't think we need to go too hard in raising the awareness about getting vaccination, other than when people see things like hotspot breakouts in Melbourne, it does give them the spur on to go and get it. Particularly the most vulnerable Australians, those over 70 in particular, are more vulnerable to poor outcomes from developing COVID.
So, Katie Allen, it seems that some of the hesitancy actually suits the government because of supply issues.
Well, I don't think anyone would say vaccine hesitancy would suit the government. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt.
Well, if you're saying that if everyone went out and you had a big campaign, you wouldn't be able to meet the demand, you kind of need some people to hold back. I'm just kind of drawing conclusions.
Look, I think your point's valid, which is that we have to have the balance as we're going forward. Vaccine hesitancy, I suppose, is a bit of an Australian privilege. We're in a good situation. People feel comfortable with it. We're in a good situation. And if you look at the polls that are coming out about vaccine hesitancy and what's behind it, it's really to do with the fact that people are concerned about potential side effects. And the message doesn't seem to have got out there in the most balanced way, that you're probably more likely, unfortunately, to have a road accident and die going to your vaccine appointment than you are to have a side effect and die from having the vaccine. And that balance of risk-benefit probably hasn't been in the mind of people, because they think, well, I'm going about my life normally, things are opened up, we're back to normal in Australia, we're safe from what's raging overseas. And so it's just making sure we don't frighten people, but that we also encourage them to realise that getting the vaccine helps protect them from death. That's why they're getting the COVID vaccine, and we want to move this COVID pandemic from being something that's deadly to being something that may be a severe nuisance. We've got to move it from being that really high mortality rate to, it's still going to be in the globe, around the globe. We just need to make sure we turn down the fatality figures with regards to COVID.
Matt,
Can I just jump in there,
yeah,
please,
sure.
Patricia, on that issue of the supply hitting the ground? Katie talked about the increasing supply, and that's good, but it actually needs to hit the ground where it's needed. And I've got a GP clinic in my electorate that wrote to me a couple of weeks ago. They've got 10 GPs. They're getting 90 vaccines a week. They want more, but they simply can't get them from the Commonwealth Government. And that's been the supply issue. And I know Katie's talking about, and the Health Minister's talking about fixing that, but it hasn't hit the ground yet. And that's the problem. And that is contributing to some of that vaccine hesitancy, which we have to overcome quickly if we're going to get those critical numbers for herd immunity later on down the track and open up the economy.
Look,
Well, firstly, we don't know if there is actually herd immunity from this vaccine yet, so that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But secondly, it's just, simply not true.
Okay, park that. And Matt, I want to ask you on some other issues. I want to turn to the Upper Hunter by-election result over the weekend. Joel Fitzgibbon today said he won't stick around if the Labor Party doesn't wake up to itself. Do you agree with him that the Labor Party needs to have some very hard conversations with itself about connecting with its working class roots?
Well, firstly, on the Hunter by-election, I think we really overplayed our hand a little bit, unfortunately, with that by the fact that we haven't won that seat in 100 years. And
sure, but I'm not talking about winning it.
win.
I have to interrupt. It's not about winning it. It's about the swing against Labor. Surely that's a warning shot, isn't it?
Well, I think that comes to a number of factors. Firstly, you had 13 candidates. In the last election, they had 7 candidates, I think it was. So many more candidates. That's going to disperse the vote a lot more. And that happened to the Nationals as well. The national primary vote fell. And the second point is that COVID is favouring incumbents, particularly at the state level at the moment. You've seen that in Queensland, you've seen that in Western Australia, you've seen that in the Tasmania elections, that there's favourites for incumbency at the moment. And that was difficult to overcome in that context. In terms of Joel's comments more broadly, I think that the Labor Party stands for 4 basic issues, and that we have been for most of our entirety, and four basic values, and that's better conditions for workers, higher wages, stronger on healthcare and particularly Medicare, education for all, and strong action on the environment and climate change.
And that's the point of my question.
Well, they're the issues that we're talking about on a constant basis. But, we spent the first half of this interview talking about COVID and vaccines, because that's the main game in town at the moment. That's the issue that's dominating the political discourse for natural reasons. People want to know that the Commonwealth Government can keep them safe, that the states can keep them safe. And that's dominating the political discourse. Okay. But we're continuing to try and explain to the Australian people that they're the 4 key Labor values that we stand for and that we'll always defend. Okay. And the proof is in the way that we operate in the Parliament. I mean, we oppose cuts to penalty rates. We oppose things like work choices. Okay. We've supported minimum wage increases, and the government's opposed those.
All right. Katie, I want to bring you in. Your colleague, coalition colleague, Matt Canavan, has spruiked the Nationals win as a sign of people supporting, quote, Aussie coal jobs. Is that the message here?
I wouldn't want to comment on why the people of the Hunter Valley have voted for their particular delegate
is it a vote
representative.
For coal?
So what I would say is that there's definitely a sense from the people I've spoken to in federal parliament who have seats in that area that there is big and serious concerns by locals about the resource industry and their jobs. And they want to know what is their future and how will their jobs be held. And they want to know that a federal government or a state government are listening to their needs and that their views are being part of the dialogue to take this country forward. So, look, there is no doubt that Gladys has done an absolutely brilliant job in New South Wales. I think she has been the premier, you could say, with regards to the COVID response, and that's going to have a definite effect. But at the same time, I think, I think the federal government is doing very well with regards to our recent budget. I think that's landed very well when I speak to other members of parliament. And on my side of politics, I think people have really seen that not only have we delivered a good outcome for COVID, but we also delivering a strong economic recovery as well. And I think people know that.
All right, we're out of time. Thanks to both of you joining me this afternoon, Liberal MP
Thanks,
Katie
Patricia.
Allen and the Shadow Assistant
Thanks, PK.
Minister for Financial Services and Superannuation, Matt Thistlethwaite.